So, as you guys have been working through the Psalms, hopefully you have found this to be absolutely enriching as an opportunity to kind of dive in deep and say, what is this trying to say? What is this trying to show me? What do I need to learn from this moment? And as I was praying through and thinking through, and I'd even talked to Evan a little bit, I said, hey, I want to change what I was going to preach about this week. It's still going to be in the Psalms. I said, but I want to maybe alter a little bit. He's like, yeah, as long as it's in Psalms. He's like, I don't really care. He's like, if God's kind of leading you a direction, go for it. So that's exactly what I did today. And I want to talk this morning about who is God. Because every single one of us in here, if we all sat down with a piece of paper, kind of sequestered off into a room, and we listed off some of God's attributes or trying to describe who he is, each of us would have a different opinion. Like, not all of the things would be the same. Like, sure, you'd see, maybe love or mercy or forgiveness or grace. You might see some of those things, but if you're in this room and you maybe haven't been a Jesus follower for very long, or maybe aren't even one right now, you might list things like vengeful, hateful, judge, jury, executioner. You might list some things that aren't necessarily flattering about who God is. And one of the things I want to talk about today is kind of work through the idea of who God actually is versus who we think he is. Now, there was a book released a few years ago by a man named Francis Chan, and he wrote in this book, he said, now I know that you don't want to imagine a God that would allow anybody to ever go to hell, that you don't want to imagine that. But if you think about God and who he is, can you truthfully say that you would never see him sending somebody for punishment? He said, if you're honest with yourself and you're really thinking through what that looks like, it's very hard to say, well, no, I can't see God punishing somebody, because we have the Bible and it shows us all of the different times where God has punished somebody for doing the wrong thing. He said, so clearly you know that God is capable of that, and because he loved us, he gave us an opportunity out of it. But we're going to be diving into that topic a little bit too, to try and understand who God is and why he does what he does. But I want to start with what God isn't. And what God isn't is distant. God is not some far off, far away being who doesn't know much about you, doesn't see what's happening, doesn't care, isn't personally involved in your life. He's not just some great big creator who he got this great big universe up, spinning and going, and then went to watch Netflix for the next 7.5 hours. Like, it's not that kind of God. He's intimately involved in every single thing that happens in each and every one of our lives. And here's what David had to say about that in Psalm 139, starting in verse 1. He said, O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything that I do. Let's pause right here for just a second. If you're reading this and you're listening to these words and you're understanding it, that's maybe a little bit intimidating to think that I don't have any secrets from God. Not any. There's nothing that I can, have, or will think that God has not already known exactly what flashed through my mind the minute that it happened, and even before it happened. It's fascinating to think through that, and maybe a little bit scary, but continue on to see what he says here. You know what I am going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. I can never escape your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. So let's think about what that looks like. Let's look at it in the context of our current relationships. I'm going to start by getting super personal. Ladies, imagine that your spouse or your significant other, you had access to what was going on in their mind all the time, constantly. Most of you would not want that, because the things that guys think are usually jokes that are inappropriate and things that are just kind of lazy and boring. That's kind of what happens in the male mind. Now, guys, on the other side of the coin, you can't even handle getting a small piece of your spouse's mind, and you would want the whole thing just kind of dropped on you all at once. That kind of intimacy in a relationship would be, for us on earth, super intimidating, because we can't handle all of those thoughts, those ideas, that content kind of racing at us all at one time. We would struggle with that. But we're not God. We aren't meant to be able to handle all of the thoughts that cross a person's mind at any given time. Now, each and every one of us here knows what some of our private thoughts are, some of the things that we think. We all have a piece in our mind that we don't really want most people to know about. And knowing that God is aware of it is kind of hard to contend with. But it opens up a layer of communication that is so intimate and so personal that it becomes a comfort, which is basically what David is saying here. I'm going to ask a question, and there are no wrong answers here. I would like to see hands go up if this is true for you. Have you ever been angry at God? Show of hands. Okay, perfect. I'm going to ask a second question. Who told him? Wow. Okay, not all the hands that went up on the first question also went up on the second. You can go to God when you're mad. You can go to God when you're sad and disappointed and frustrated and angry, when you didn't get that promotion that you prayed for, when that relationship you were praying for fell apart, when you were praying for great Aunt Gertrude to get better and recover and she never pulled through, and you want to go to God and say, God, I prayed for this thing. Where were you? He can handle that, because he already knows that you're thinking it. But the beauty of the relationship with God is that you can take time and talk about it. If you have a genuine relationship with someone, that's how it continues to build. That's how it continues to grow, is through your communication with them. And God wants that exact same thing with you. He doesn't just want some passing, fleeting, like we've all sat down to pray before dinner, rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub, yay God. He doesn't want just a real quick passing, glancing blow. He wants to be involved deeply and intimately with what's going on in your life, because he loves you, he knows you, and he cares. It's one of those things where we can so easily get caught up in the wrong mentality of who God is. He's not far off, this distant creator who started the universe spinning and then checked out. He knows that you had a bad day at work. He knows that maybe your marriage is kind of on the rocks a little bit. He knows that your relationship with your kids isn't maybe where you want it to be, or that your finances are an everyday concern. He already knows all of these things. And even if you're frustrated with him that your prayer hasn't been answered, you can keep going to him and keep praying about it. But at the same time, because God isn't distant and he isn't far away, here's another thing that God isn't. God isn't Dear Abby. He just isn't. So when you pray, don't make it, God, dear God, I'm really dealing with an anger issue, sincerely frustrated. You don't have to have that kind of a relationship. Go to him, be sincere, and lay yourself bare in front of him because you already are. It already exists. All the way back to the Garden of Eden, whenever Adam and Eve had first sinned, and they thought, we're going to hide from God. But God knew where they were. But that wasn't enough. They also covered up so that God couldn't see that they were naked. Because again, they were ashamed. Yes, you might be ashamed of the thoughts and the ideas and the opinions about God that are flashing through your mind right now. You might be, and that's okay. Because there's some stuff that crosses our minds that we're not happy about, and that's okay too. Take it to God. He wants to hear it. Listen to how David continues on in Psalm 139. He said, I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night. But even in darkness, I cannot hide from you. To you, the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. This is a prayer from David where he's saying, God, I get it. I understand it. You're not far away. You're not this far off creator. You are personal and intimate and right here and want to be close to me. You know everything there is to know about me. There are no secrets that are able to be kept from you. That is a tremendous gift if you are a Jesus follower. That means that whenever you've got something going on in life, no matter how deep, how private, how frustrating, how aggravating it might be, God is standing there and saying, I'm here. I care. Bring it to me. Even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, even if you're mad at me about whatever it is, you can bring it to me. Now, for most of us here, whenever we were teenagers, we probably did some pretty stupid stuff. And for those of you in the room that aren't quite teenagers yet, your parents are expecting the stupid stuff that you're going to be doing one day too. But whenever we had those things happen, there were moments where our parents flew off the handle, lost their ever-loving minds, and screamed because they were frustrated that we did something that was inappropriate, we did something that was dangerous, we did something that could hurt us, and there were consequences for those things. But they also still loved us. There are times where, as a teenager, you looked at your life with your parents kind of like a roller coaster, where they were the safety bar in the roller coaster, and you wanted to check and make sure that the safety bar was still going to be there, so you pushed on it pretty hard sometimes to make sure that it was going to stay put, because the safety bar is there for a reason, and that's what you want. You don't want to push on that safety bar, have it give, and go all the way to the front of the seat and be like, well, I'm going to have a final destination moment on this roller coaster now, and we're done for. You have that same relationship with God. He's the same as that safety bar. You can push and put a little pressure on it and say, God, I'm struggling with why you're not answering certain prayers, or you're answering my prayers with no or not now. Push on that a little bit. Lean into it. Have a relationship with God where you can go to him with anything. Because if he already knows it, why not? What would stop you from saying, you know what? I've been praying for this promotion for the last 4 years. God gave it to me 6 months ago. I finally got that promotion. And then today I get a letter in my inbox and it says, your job is being outsourced to China. I'm mad, God. I'm very, very angry. Why would you give me the thing that I had been praying for and then let it be ripped away from me? I'm not happy. I want to come to you and I want to file a complaint. Where's your suggestion box? And you look at God and you can say all of those things and He's willing to hear it. He's willing to listen. He's willing to take that struggle from you. He's willing to hear those things that you want to reach out and say, God, why? Why do you allow this? Why do you allow that? Why are the people that I see not obeying your rules and breaking your laws and breaking your commandments always getting ahead while I'm over here following the straight and narrow, doing the right thing, and I don't feel like I'm being blessed? Why are you allowing this to happen? God can handle that too. Now, you might not always like what God's answer is, and frankly, He's not exactly on the hook to give us the reason why, because we're His creation, He's our creator, and He doesn't have to tell us what's going on. Because there are times where we get into that mindset where we're like, God, these people are picking on me. I want you to do something about it. And God will look at us and say, what do you want me to do? See, David had a similar situation. And he learned that one of the other things that God isn't our attack dog. We can't look at the person who was the Karen next door who lives next. By the way, if there's anyone in here named Karen, I'm not speaking specifically about you. I just mean the universal Karen, okay? Back to this. If you have a neighbor down the street who's being a Karen and she is absolutely wrecking some of the things that are happening in your life, you can't just say, okay, God, sick 'em. It doesn't work that way. He's not our attack dog. And this is actually an area where even David is kind of bumping up against some of the rough edges with this. David says this in his continued prayer, "O God, if only you would destroy the wicked. Get out of my life, you murderers. They blaspheme you. Your enemies misuse your name. O Lord, shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred, for your enemies are my enemies." Now, I wasn't going to do this because there had not been any event that had happened up until, we'll call it, just for argument's sake, the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, that people were talking about that involved hatred or despising or frustration. I just want to say right here super clearly, we cannot expect a godless, ungodly, unsaved world to care about godly things. Let me say that again. We can't expect a godless world to care about godly things. It's never going to happen. You can't legislate it. You can't force it. You can't in some way drag people kicking and screaming to it. It's never going to happen. And David's mentality is, well, these people are making fun of you. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. Shouldn't I hate them? And Jesus very clearly gave us the answer. No, you shouldn't hate anybody. You should love everybody just as I have loved you. Does that mean people I don't agree with? Yes. Does that mean the guy that stole my lawnmower? Yes. Does that mean people who offended my religion? Yes. Does that mean people who are rude to me? Yes. Does that mean Karen? Yes, it means everybody. Love the people who are your enemies. When they do and say things that are hurtful and mean and aggravating, love them. When they do and say things that are violent and hostile and in any sort of circumstance evil, love them. It's not an option. It's not just a good idea that Jesus said, hey, we're going to try this love thing for a little bit, and if it doesn't help work out, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go back to that hatred thing and see how that works for a little bit. That's not how it goes. Does God have enemies? Yes. Do we have enemies? Yes. Because as a follower of Jesus, because Jesus was hated first, you too are going to be hated. But you also at one point in your life were an enemy of God because you didn't follow him. You didn't obey him. You didn't accept his son. You may be spat in the face of the rules and the laws and the things that he had written down. You were in that boat at one point in time in your life, and yet God still loved you enough to say, I'm going to send my son for you specifically. Not just in general, not just the church, not just this particular group of people, but for you, the individual you. Because God looked and said, I don't want heaven without this person in it. So when you've got the people that are mocking you, taunting you, they're trying to make you feel ashamed. They are making jokes of your religion, your faith, the music that you sing, the reasons that you go to church, the reasons that you behave certain ways. Maybe some of you in here don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't cuss, you don't do this, you don't do that. You've never cheated on your spouse. You've never done any of those things that you knew you weren't supposed to be doing, and you chose those things as a follower of Jesus, and somebody mocks you for it, and you're looking at that situation and you're like, I can't stand that person. Maybe even so far as to say, I hate the way they treat me. But when you cross that line over into, I hate them, that changes the criteria and the nature of the conversation. Because now you've gone from, I've been mistreated and I don't like that, to I'm wishing harm to befall this other person or group of people. See, Jesus sent his son so that you would be able to go through life because he had a desire for you to be a part of his family. He had a desire for you to be a part of the future. He had a desire for you to be a part of heaven in the future. But he also has that same desire for the people that we hate. Every single one of them, regardless of why. He wants us to make heaven crowded by making disciples of all nations, all peoples, all colors, all creeds, all sexualities. He wants us to gather those people in, help them come to know him, and he will do the transforming work and the transforming power to bring them along to where they need to be. It is not our job to try and clean them up first and then present them to God. It is our job to tell them the truth of the gospel, share who Jesus is, and let Jesus do the transforming work. I can't do it. You can't do it. It has to be done by God. But because this is what he wants, we have to recognize that there is a certain level of reality that comes into play here. That the idea of who we think God is and what we think God wants doesn't always match with who God actually is. He doesn't want anybody to not make it into heaven. But here's the reality. There are people, every single one of us in here was destined on a path toward hell. Not because God hates us and wants to judge us and wants us to be penalized and burned, but because, frankly, sin cannot exist in his presence. It can't even be in proximity. And because every single one of us was sinful, he said, you know what? I'm going to make a way to help them out of this so that this isn't going to be a problem, so that I can spend eternity with them. And David, at the very end of this, he gets it. Because here's the answer to the question that I started off with this morning. Who is God? He's our loving, caring creator with a plan. And I say it like that because there are times that people forget that God has a plan for each and every one of you for your life. The place where you're working right now, God has people there that he wants you to be leading to him. The place where you go and get your groceries, there might be a person at that checkout counter, assuming you don't do self-checkout, that needs to hear about Jesus. The place where you go and get your overpriced coffee in the morning, that barista, she or he might need to know something about the faith that you have and that you possess that they don't currently know. And they're fighting through life, trying to understand. And they can't get there unless someone can help demonstrate the path forward. Here is what David says for how it applies to us personally. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Now, if you kind of zoned out or tuned out any other part of this sermon, and you haven't really been paying attention, just focus up here for a second, because this piece of scripture is absolutely incredible. We've already said that God knows everything about who we are, every thought that we think, everything that we say, every word that is ready to be uttered out of our mouths. God already knows all of it. But how often do you ask him, God, point out the things that shouldn't be in here. Point out the things that I'm getting wrong. Now, I can say as a guy, I don't like being wrong. I think all of us fall into that boat, but guys especially, we don't like being wrong. So taking this step and saying, God, show me where I am a screw up is tough. Ladies, for you, you might look at it and say, I already have enough people criticizing the things that are happening in my life. I have a mother-in-law. I know what this feels like. I don't need to feel that level of judgment from God. God is not going to do this with the mentality of judgment, because you're asking him for this so that you can grow closer to him. He will say, this is where one of your problems is. Lovingly, compassionately, let me help you correct it. Let me put people in your life that can come alongside you and speak into it. You know, you heard Evan say that if this is, one of your first times here, or you've been connected here, that your next step is getting involved in a group. I cannot tell you how valuable that is. Because that is something where you can be surrounded by a group of people who are in your inner circle. The ones that can look at you and say, hey man, listen, I heard what you said to your kids the other day in the hallway at church. I'm not judging you. I don't want to bring up something that's bad for you. But man, that was tough. Are you doing okay? Are you and the kids okay? You wouldn't take that from a stranger very well. But if you're in a group where you've sat around and you've been vulnerable together and you've been able to say, this has been hard for me and I've been dealing with this or dealing with that, having that person come up, wrap an arm around you and say, hey, is everything okay? Are you doing all right? How can I be praying for you? It sounded like you were having a bad day on Sunday. What do you need? That is a game-changing question. Because having people that can help point things out in your life is incredible. If you are looking for that, this is the right place to be. And if you're not currently looking for that, I pray that God softens your heart to the point where you're ready to seek it out. Because every single person needs somebody who is on the inside that isn't just their spouse, that can speak into the things that are happening. Now, here's what we're going to close with today. Being open like this is hard. It's very complicated. It's very difficult. And honestly, some of you here might be like, Matt, I don't even know you from anybody else that would be walking down the street right now. And I completely get that. But I want to tell you that being open with God is easier when you remember that He already knows everything that's happening anyway. Just be honest. Go to Him in a conversation, because there's nothing to be embarrassed by at that point. If you are a person who says, I'm not big on prayer, which is probably about 80% of people that attend church regularly, whether it's openly praying or privately praying, that it's not really my jam. I don't really get into it. I kind of feel like my words are just bouncing off the ceiling. It's time to figure out what that looks like. It's time to figure out how to get beyond that and into the next step, because that's what an intimate relationship with God can be, where you can go to Him and you can talk and you can bring up anything that is happening. Not like you're trying to rub a genie's bottle and get him to pop up and say, what do you need? What do you need? That's not who God is. But you can go to Him and say, God, Aunt Gertrude died. I prayed that she was going to get better, and she maybe did for a little bit, but she's gone now, and I want to know why. Doesn't mean that God's going to give you the answer. It doesn't always mean that every question you take to Him is going to come back with a filled out form of why He did what He did. We don't have the right to expect that, because He's God and we're not. But what we can expect is Him to say in that moment, you wouldn't understand why, even if you knew, but let me give you my peace. Let me give you my comfort. Let me give you my compassion. Let me give you my love in the midst of everything that's going on in your life. I can't answer your question with anything that's going to give you peace, but I can give you my peace and understanding and love in the moment. I can give you that. And that, friends, is way better than whatever the answer would have been in the first place. Because the answer at that point doesn't matter. Whatever had happened is done. Why my job was outsourced doesn't matter. God gave me peace. He sustained me, He sustained my family, and I'm doing better. Why did this person die? Why did I receive this diagnosis? Why is this happening to me? All of those things are questions that you desperately want answered. But if God gives you peace, support, and comfort in the midst of that, the answer didn't matter anyway. Because what He's giving you is so much greater than the answer. That is who God is. That is what He wants to do for each and every one of His children, is to be that provider, to be that person that cares for them and gets them through some of the messiest portions of life.